Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Supervisory Conversations on Coaching. As far as who is speaking today, so I'm Amanda Wolford. I'm your facilitator for the Supervisory Conversation. We have an audience of Supervisory Development Program alumni online today, and we also have a return speaker, Brandon Sullivan, our Senior Director of Talent Strategy, Center of Expertise. And then I also want to welcome Lovey Peisig, who's the Senior Manager of Leadership Development, and Jenny McRae, Leadership Development Consultant and International Coaching Federation certified person. So super glad you're all here today. As far as our format, what we're going to talk about is what coaching is and isn't, and then why it's important and the distinction between coaching and feedback. So we're talking more about that, the unique challenges managers face in coaching, and we're also going to talk about the key skills that managers need to hone in on. So I'm actually going to hand it over to Brandon, who's going to define coaching and provide us with some data from the latest employee engagement survey, and then also talk about coachability. So Brandon.
Thanks, Amanda. Good to be here today. Thanks everybody for joining us for this really critical topic. So first of all, let's talk about what coaching is. Coaching is a term that gets used a lot in a lot of different contexts and can mean a lot of different things. So when we're talking about coaching as a manager or a supervisor, we're talking about really coaching to help people develop and become more effective. And here's a nice definition here that we use a lot for our supervisor development program around, as a manager, coaching is about equipping people with tools, knowledge, and opportunities that they need to develop themselves and become more effective. And just kind of a cool thing is that, so David Peterson, he has a PhD from the University of Minnesota, and he spent about 10 years as the director of Google's Leadership Development and Executive Coaching Center of Expertise. And he also spent many years as a senior leader at a worldwide or a global consulting firm leading their coaching practice. And so there's a lot of great connections between coaching practice and research and the University of Minnesota. Would like to start by getting a sense from all of you, kind of your comfort level and your confidence in your own coaching skills. And this is going to be anonymous. We won't know who said what, so I'd encourage you to, respond candidly, but on a scale of, 1 to 10, or sorry, 1 to 5, how effective do you feel like your coaching is today? Thinking about this definition here, 1 being not effective and 5 being very effective. And I would say I definitely wouldn't give myself a 5, even as someone who teaches this stuff. So, okay, so we've got the most common answer is a 3. With a few of you saying a 4 and a few of you a 2, and then a small number of 1s, which it's great if, starting with here's where I'm at is the important part. I would definitely say I've been in parts of my career where I would have said a 1 for sure, and I have days where I would be a 1. So it looks like, just interpreting this, most people here feel like you have some level of confidence in coaching skills, but that there's probably some room to grow. And I would say that's probably where most of us who even teach this stuff are at too. So thank you for sharing that. So let's just talk a little bit about some data we have about how all of this is going at the University of Minnesota. So we did the employee engagement survey last October, and there are 2 questions that are relevant for what we're talking about today, or most relevant for what we're talking about today. One is we ask about getting clear and regular feedback, and feedback is a critical part of coaching, but of course it's not all of coaching. And then we also ask about receiving coaching for development, or for those in faculty roles, it's more a question around mentoring for development, but it's kind of the same idea. And so when we look at what our own faculty and staff are saying about how all this is going at the university, you can see, on this slide, that we have, there's, a gap between faculty and staff, which isn't necessarily shocking, but 57% of faculty said they got clear and regular feedback. 76% of staff said that they do, which is actually above the external norm for high-performing organizations. So that HP norm is created by our vendor, Korn Ferry. They're a global consulting firm who works with tons of different organizations. And they have a norm that shows sort of the typical responses of organizations that perform really well financially as well as in terms of engagement. So it's just sort of a benchmark you can use to look at. So for clear and regular feedback, it looks like there's maybe a little bit of room to grow for faculty. Staff are getting a lot of it on average. Doesn't mean everybody is. And then the question around mentoring and coaching for development, we have a little bit more room there to grow, although it's gone up quite a bit in the last 10 years. So we had 53% of faculty saying that they're receiving mentoring for development and 66% of staff. So just to give you a little sense for some of the data we're seeing in our organization, so a little bit of room to grow on the mentoring and development coaching, and that's kind of part of what we're here today to talk about. Feedback is something that we've talked a lot about, and for those of you who have participated in some of our programs, you've probably become familiar with the situation behavior impact model of effective feedback, which is a really critical skill set to have. No, the purpose of feedback is really to help people gauge their current level of effectiveness in terms of expectations for the role. And so it's really how you help people understand, where they are today. And to give you an example, so let's say you have someone who you notice they repeatedly in meetings are cutting off other people, interrupting other people, and so on. And you can see that's getting in the way of them being effective. It's impacting other people. So what you would do in terms of giving feedback is you would talk about the situation, the meetings, the behavior that you're observing, which is they're cutting people off mid-sentence, which they may not even be aware they're doing. So that's why it's really important to give the behavioral feedback. And then the impact, it's people are not feeling respected. Maybe they're shutting down and disengaging or getting irritated, that kind of thing. And so that's an important way to help the person understand that behavior isn't effective. But of course, that alone doesn't get you to behavior change and improvement. So that's where it's, coaching is broader than just giving feedback. So let's take a look then at some of the other components. So you may be familiar with this graphic. It's a slightly simplified version of the coaching model that we use in the supervisor development program. And it shows the different components that all go into effective coaching, which is really about how do we help people grow, learn, and develop more effective skills. And so, successful coaching on the whole includes, building self-awareness. Motivation is really critical. That growing your skills is a lot of work, and so it does require a lot of motivation. And then you see the feedback is a really critical part of that, application and accountability. So feedback is really helpful for people to kind of gain self-awareness of where are they at today, or what's their level of effectiveness today on some of those key skills. Where might they have some need to improve, to grow? Where are they already, maybe doing really, really well? Because feedback can, of course, be positive feedback on things that are going quite well. They also, if you give feedback in a way that is, effective, that is supportive, using that situation behavior impact model, it's more likely to be received in a positive way, not always, but then that can create some motivation, which is really kind of the next step, is getting that motivation to try to change. And so this is a really key part of that. So when we think about improving self-awareness and motivating people to change and develop, there's another component to this that I want to talk about a little bit. And so it's really important. A lot of times it's easy to kind of dump expectations on managers and supervisors and sort of say, okay, here's all the things you need to be doing to develop people and make sure they're effective. And of course, that's true. It's also a two-way street. And so the person that you're coaching, they need to show up with certain things as well in order to learn and grow. You can't force someone to get better. You can't force someone to learn. They have to do their part as well. And there's a concept called coachability that really unpacks what that looks like. And so these are the things that the person you're coaching really needs to bring to the table. And I'll talk a little bit about these because what you'll want to do is be thinking about, is the person showing up with these or not? And where do they maybe need to do some of these things that they're not doing today? So seeking out feedback is about more than just saying, yeah, I'm open to feedback, right? It's really about proactively seeking out feedback on a consistent basis. So people who really are good at learning and growing and improving, they actually seek out the feedback. They don't wait for people to kind of give it to you. They really are proactive in that way. And the other thing that's really helpful as part of this is finding some people who are sort of truth tellers, people who will be honest with you. So if you're coaching someone, that's something you could explore with them is, do you have people beyond me as your manager who you can go to and who will give you really candid feedback? Because that's really important. Then the second thing is responding to feedback. Does the person you're coaching respond positively and productively to feedback? And there's a couple pieces to that. One is, basically saying thank you for the feedback, even if they disagree with it. If someone becomes defensive and starts arguing about feedback, that's generally going to shut down future feedback. So one piece of it is helping the person you're coaching to say, okay, I may disagree with the feedback, but I appreciate that you gave this to me. That's an important part of it. And then also part of responding to feedback is asking follow-up questions to really understand what the feedback is. Now, there's a difference between defensive questions and seeking to understand questions here. So really being coachable is about asking questions to make sure you understand what the person is saying. So it might be, let's say they say, hey, you did a great job in that meeting. I think people really appreciated what you had to say. This is a positive feedback example. You might ask follow-up questions and say, well, what specifically did I do that seemed to be effective? And what did you specifically notice that made you, think that this really went over well? So it's those kinds of questions that are really helpful in responding to feedback. And then third is reflecting on feedback. And that's really about sorting through the feedback you're getting and sort of thinking about, what are the themes here? And you can think about, some of the feedback is going to be really important and really necessary for you to act on. Other feedback can just be an outlier, right? So sometimes someone's having a bad day and you happen to be, in their way and they, give you some negative feedback, but it's just because they were having a bad day. So really reflecting on feedback is about thinking about what are the patterns and the themes that I'm hearing in this feedback. And then the last part, of course, is acting on feedback. That's really the whole point. And so is the person you're coaching, are they willing and able to take action and try new things to try to improve, to try to grow, to try to learn? So again, it's kind of a two-way street here, and this is what you will need from your coachee. And of course, you want to model this as the manager as well. As related to that is it's important to think about, is the person you're coaching, are they in that sort of learning zone? And the concept here that's important to think about is that confidence piece. So you can have someone who's overly confident and in the I don't care zone. And what that would look like is someone who thinks, let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, they're already a 9 or a 10 on whatever the skill is. And you maybe are thinking, what, they're more like a 4 or 5. They need to make some progress on that. But if they are in that high confidence, I don't care zone, you're probably not going to have a lot of luck with them. So that's where giving that feedback and helping them to sort of level set where they truly are at today is helpful. And then conversely, you can have people who lack confidence and in that I can't zone. And that's pretty common. I see that a lot. And what that looks like is, someone might have the willingness to learn and grow. They want to learn and grow, but they don't feel like they can. It's sort of like they feel like they're a 1 out of 10 and just have no hope. And so that's too where it's helpful to help them calibrate. Maybe they're a little bit better than they think they are. Yeah, maybe they still have room to grow, but they can do it, right? And so that's an important thing to assess as well, is sort of that level of confidence and getting people in that learning zone. And then, so we'll go back now to the coaching model and kind of round that out. Application, so we've talked about self-awareness, motivation, and then the feedback piece. Application is about providing opportunities to practice skills as the next step. And so, this is where people need to be able to try out new skills, try out a different way of approaching things. But knowing that the first time is probably not going to be perfect. So it has to be an environment where they can do it imperfectly and get feedback on that and sort of grow over time. So that's a really important thing to be thinking about, is how do you provide someone then with those opportunities, and maybe it's a special project or a specific assignment or whatever, where they can really apply those skills so that they can get better at them. And then, of course, accountability. And accountability is something that a lot of times we think about the negative aspect of that, but it's really important to think about how do you reward and recognize and sort of celebrate when people do get better, when they do improve, when they do learn and grow and demonstrate improvement over time. And then, of course, there is the more negative side of that around if someone doesn't improve, if they don't learn, if they don't grow, then what are those consequences for that? And being really, as clear as you can on that. And I know at the university and in higher ed in general, accountability is a tricky thing a lot of times, and many managers don't feel like we have a lot of levers to pull in terms of accountability. But it is something where if you, kind of hold up as a positive example when people do improve and learn and grow, that can be a really good way to create that sort of learning culture. All right, so this is a lot of info that I've just thrown out there on sort of coaching and the different pieces and then the two-way street element. So I'm going to turn it back to Amanda, and I think we're going to do a couple of polls now.
Yes, thank you so much, Brandon. That was a lot of really, really good information. And so we want you to kind of think about what that looks like for you. So the first poll question is, what is your biggest barrier to coaching? Is it time, motivation, skills, or other? We are just allowing a single choice. So if you had to pick, what would be the top of mind for that? And the second question, what do you find the most challenging part of the coaching process? Building self-awareness, employee motivation, ongoing feedback, opportunities to apply, and holding them accountable. Okay, we're sharing the results of the poll. And so for the first question, the biggest barrier to coaching. So number one is the skills at 46%, never had the formal training. Well, we're here to change that as a first step. So more information to come on how we can help you with those skills. And then second to that is the time. And yes, that is definitely something that I think everyone is dealing with these days, just having so much to do and so much going on. Then the other question, just to debrief that for a moment, the top answer was the accountability piece, and also then building the self-awareness. So yeah, holding them accountable is something you probably have a little bit more control of in that, as the manager. But that self-awareness piece, that is really that intrinsic piece where that person needs to have the self-awareness. So that can be a little more trickier for sure. I am just going into the chat as well, just to make some connections there. So we've got staff members who are getting emotional as well. So that might be a barrier and a challenge is staying in the moment, realizing there's a coaching moment. Somebody else commented earlier about giving someone feedback or, and then realizing, hey, I just coached this person. And that's really exciting too, when it doesn't have to be, super, super formal. And we're going to talk about that as well. Coaching within policies and unions and overseeing work. That's very different from what the manager does. Yes, absolutely. These are all really good additions to some of the barriers that you're experiencing and challenges in working with this coaching model. So we are going to move into the second half of our webinar here with our speakers. So just a couple of things before we jump into that. As Brandon mentioned earlier, coaching is really that two-way street. So your direct reports also need to take ownership of their own career and development. And I co-facilitate Leading on All Levels program with Jenny, who's on the call today, and our colleague Nathan. And we do spend a lot of time with those individual contributors and allowing them to work through those goals. And we do an individual development plan. And another just kind of piece of information or piece of advice that I could give you as a coach myself is that I don't work harder than my client, because again, we have to fit into that or figure out that self-awareness and motivation piece. And that is really on the person that you are coaching. So you have definitely, skin in the game with that, but it really does come from that person. So as managers, you have unique opportunities when it comes to coaching your employees and some unique challenges. So opportunities, challenges, unique. We're going to talk about those. We're going to dive into more detail with Jenny and Lovey. So I am going to welcome them again. We're so excited that you're here today. And just by way of introductions, can you share a little bit more about your current role, what you do at the university, and some professional development experiences that you've had related to management or coaching? And I'm going to turn it over to Lovey to go first.
Thanks, Amanda. Good afternoon, all. It's great to be here. Yeah, I'm Lovey Peisig, entering probably my third full year as a manager with Jenny here, who is a direct report of mine. But we'll name that we actually started out my journey here at the university as staff as colleagues. And technically, Jenny was my mentor to start. So I offered that just to also normalize some of the moving parts of going from peer to manager. And for me, it certainly expedited my focus on what's going to change in our relationship and what's staying the same. And I think this coaching piece was a critical ingredient for that. So happy to expand on that in a bit. Prior to being at the university as staff, I was trained in our Department of Psychology and CLA in the counseling psychology program. So a lot more mental health focused, career counseling, career coaching, certainly probably part of my day-to-day work. So I would say that was a pretty critical entry point with what it means to be a coach. How is that different from being a therapist or a manager? And I have to name, I was a very serious soccer player athlete from age 5 to 18. And so that term coach brings up for me a lot of different images. And certainly there are some connections I think you can make if you're into sports or other realms related. So that's my mini introduction, Amanda. Thanks.
Thanks, Lovey. And we have Jenny McRae with us as well.
Yes, it's lovely to be here today. Jenny McRae, she, her pronouns. I've been here at the university since 2011, and I've been in this talent strategy team, or formerly leadership and talent development team, since 2015. And as Lovey mentioned, over the last 3 years, I've had really the opportunity to have her as my manager. And then prior to that, we're working colleagues along with many of the other talent strategy folks here on the call. But in the role as a leadership and development consultant, I work with various staff and faculty leadership programming cohorts, like Amanda mentioned, leading at all levels, but we have a variety of different programs. So I'm deeply involved in those. I also work with individual leaders across the entire system with some of our leadership assessments, doing individual coaching, consulting on some of the employee engagement, as well as broader leadership or organizational development needs within different colleges, departments, or units. So that's what I get to do in my work. I'm really passionate about that type of work. Educationally, I come to the team with a degree in business communications, and I have a master's degree in applied psychology. So this whole idea of how we communicate and how we coach and how we develop as humans is really at the intersection of kind of how I've been educationally informed to this type of work. Because of that intersection, I'm really passionate about coaching, and then continued my own professional development to go and get additional coaching certification and training, including the ICF, which is the International Coaching Federation, which is one of the larger organizations that provide some ethical and coaching guidelines to the industry more broadly. So that's where I'm coming from today, and glad to be here.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, Lovey. Again, thank you so much for being here. And before we dive into the conversation or the questions that we have for you today, just want to note that when we were prepping for this session as a supervisory development team, we read a lot of materials and research on the topic of coaching and manager as coach. And so while there's a lot of nuance there, there is a difference between professional coach and manager as coach. And so we want to just highlight a couple of things on that. So this slide is showing the main distinctions that professional coaches and managers as a coach can experience. And this is adapted from a study that used mixed methods approach and included a comprehensive lit review, interviews, and team member surveys to address this topic. So in the first column, you'll find the elements of coaching, things like who sets the agenda and goals for coaching, how formal is the arrangement, and what is the relationship and commitment in the coaching process. So in the middle column or the second column, it represents the professional coach. And then the third is like the manager's coach. So there's some distinct differences that you can notice when looking and comparing these columns, is that when we're coaching or as managers as coach, it's a little more informal, but the need for commitment to organizational goals and priorities is high. And whereas for a professional coach, it's more of a formal relationship, but it's all about the client and all about their goals and needs and things like that. So just to point out, one difference. And I'm curious how this is playing out in your role, Lovey, both as a professional coach and then also as a manager. So my first question for Lovey is, what advantages do you believe managers have in coaching their team members? And conversely, what challenges might they face compared to a professional coach?
Yeah. Oh, there's so much to say. So I'm going to try and keep it short, concise, and provide some examples. Really kind of living in both worlds at sometimes in the same hour of the work week. I think as a formal coach, you really are having that coach status, and it's a little bit more permanent when working with your organization client, whether that's a team, a leader, their direct report, whoever. That's where I think the sports analogy is helpful. Your coach for a sport is your coach. Now, as a manager, I think it's both a gift and can create challenges. I think of it as more of a style, a lever that you pull on when you're in kind of a coaching zone with your team members, whether it's the whole team or the individual. You're using that coaching, and I think the visual that Brandon highlighted earlier really speaks to this iterative and kind of cyclical approach of, there's some sort of intention related to the work and related to the portfolio of work that you as a manager are responsible for with what you're coaching for and why. The beauty of that, I think, is as the manager, you probably have the most agency in the organization to, know what that person you're coaching for is doing, right? You're responsible for assigning work, certainly in that performance management space, providing feedback anyway with how well they're doing or what needs improvement. And so there's just so many rich opportunities if you're kind of tapping into that coaching zone with them, because you get to, in the moment, see where they could apply that work, offer in the moment feedback, and supplement that with ongoing communications and support. For me, that's huge in the training development space that our team often dabbles in. We know that 70% in growth and development is really with being able to apply feedback or skills that you're learning in the moment and then take time after to debrief and process how it went. And so I think as a manager, if you're able to do that coaching work with your team, you're really just making that way more quickly adaptable for your employees to kind of learn and grow. That formal coaches can certainly try to do as well, but they certainly don't have all the control or power to design what the work tasks are or know what's coming ahead by way of opportunity. Same reason I think that can certainly be challenges, right? I saw in the chat someone referenced to, there are points where I think you as a manager, knowing what your own limits are with coaching people, and sometimes that is just by design with the work that's set in place. And so, especially for folks who are overseeing work where the skill sets and needs for improvement or just needs for growth are well out of your own skill or wheelhouse, I think that's common, especially in certain technical areas or fields where you not necessarily had experience doing the work that your team members that you oversee are doing. Certainly there are times then when I think getting an external coach or someone else in the organization to formally coach your employees is a really great benefit, because they know what the latest techniques or skills are to be applied in sort of the work. And so you as a manager can certainly sponsor that, encourage it, help, again, identify opportunities, but having someone else in that moment be more of the formal coach is usually a good idea. I think there's some other times, where I think having a fresh set of eyes as an external or just a new perspective can really be helpful in the coaching space. I think one of the advantages, though, that again, managers have is in that performance space. So creating expectations of what good work looks like, what is required to be successful with the team or with the broader organization. I think managers already being charged with performance management, you really do get to spark the why is this important? Why does this matter? Why is growth or development critical? I think managers have that unique influence and agency to really heighten that in ways that someone else in the organization who's not responsible for an employee's performance or performance management. You just kind of carry that extra influence and potentially motivation for employee growth and change. So those are some of the immediate things that come to mind. There's certainly an amazing longer list of advantages as well as challenges, but those are the few that I really wanted to highlight today.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your thoughts and expertise on having that dual role within talent strategy. Super insightful. So moving along with Jenny here today. Jenny, the questions that we have for you are for managers who may not have formal coaching roles. And as we saw in the poll, that was the #1 barrier that folks are feeling about their coaching. So if they're interested in develop coaching skills, what benefits do you see in investing time and effort into learning these skills? And secondly, what skills do you find most helpful to focus on?
Yeah, great questions. So I think broadly the benefits that, a manager can have in investing the time and effort and really recognizing that number really stuck out to me. I think it was 46%. So a large number of folks really indicating that is that for managers, there can be this really great opportunity to build on your own leadership skills. A lot of the skills that are really part of coaching are also really overlapping with that of leadership development and development as a whole. So they can really have a tremendous impact and value to you, how you lead, your leadership style that you're going to continue to create for those around you. Coaching is certainly a transferable skill that you can mostly apply to any role that you'll continue to have in your own leadership journey. Sometimes too, that can also include having your own coach that can really help you support your own development in that too. So that's another opportunity or avenue. And then broadly, the benefits too for the team and the organization. As Brandon mentioned earlier in the slides, there are these connections with employee engagement and high-performing organizations. So there's some really broad impact to your team, to the organization. Coaching, when you do that within your team or with individuals on your team, can really leverage a lot of those strengths that they're bringing to the team, those opportunities that they might have in the future on the individual and collective level. So as a team, as you continue to grow your skill set, how does that really operationalize kind of your advantage within the organization? How can you continue to improve, I guess? And then too, I think broadly, coaching as a whole, because it is really tied to how we connect with others, how we communicate with others, can really foster that culture within the team that can be supportive of continual development, the opportunity for connection, well-being, and kind of beyond too. Because it is that, and I'll talk about this to the answer to the question about skills, it is so much about how we really relationally connect, how we communicate, and really support the individual, but also their development kind of as a both and, I think. So to your second question, then, I think there's so many skills that can really go into this and really appreciate that there are some really specific skills, and 46% of you really indicating you hadn't had training on those. And so amplifying, I know our team here has some resources on some of these, but really active listening is really a key component of coaching, but also development. It's really essential for any type of communication or engagement when we work with one another. But for some of that coaching model and for assessing coachability, really being able to sit and listen wholeheartedly, being really present to the moment and to that individual are really important to really foster that connection. Connected to that active listening too is on the follow-up and really being prepared to ask open-ended questions, to be curious, to follow up with, what comes next, trying to find out more information from that individual without really jumping to conclusions or kind of feeling like you're the only person driving that conversation as well. And then, as you saw in that coaching model, a big part of that model is being able to give effective feedback, which includes the process of being able to prepare for giving that feedback. So coaching can take that time, not only in the moment, but also time for you to prepare as an individual for that conversation, balancing that feedback to that positive and developmental feedback. So thinking about that both end approach. And then again, using that situation behavior impact model can really, really be helpful to that strong feedback that you'll be giving to the individual. So those would be my top three, but I think there's many others that can really go into that for each individual, but those would be at my core.
Thanks so much, Jenny. That is very important. All those skills that you listed, we're going to spend a little bit more time diving into those skills. So, but just to reiterate what Jenny mentioned about active listening and giving that effective feedback. Earlier, Brandon talked about situation behavior impact and how that can have a huge, impact on performance and within your coaching as well, but it's not the end all be all in coaching. And then asking good and open-ended questions versus jumping to solutions. There are the skills that we've listed already that Jenny talked about. They're really important to coaching. They're also fundamental for so many other things that we do. As Jenny mentioned, there's a lot of transferable skills in coaching. And so as a supervisor, honing in on these items are going to help you make more of those meaningful conversations, approach situations with curiosity, manage conflict. So again, they're all kind of transferable across the board. And all these skills are weaved in throughout our programs and materials in the supervisory development program. So if they sound familiar, that is a really good sign that you've been through it. But of course, it never hurts to do a refresher. So you can always go back to our content library for quick refreshers at any time. And then keep in mind that the skills that we've listed, try to find those opportunities to practice them each day. And even outside of coaching, even outside of work, think about with your friends, your family, in different multiple roles that you hold as well. You can also bring these into those situations too. Building onto these fundamental coaching skills, the rest of these items that we've added here are a little bit more nuanced. So things like effective performance management, knowing what success looks like, the ability to gauge skill levels and identify those opportunities for development. Again, we really want to emphasize that that's the opportunities for development as a two-way street. I think a lot of direct reports sometimes wait for their manager to offer them opportunities, but they need to be seeking those opportunities out as well. And then seeing potential and communicating in a way that's inspiring and supportive, which can take even more time, practice, and experience. So the second half of these skills are, like we said, a lot more nuanced and take a lot more practice and time. So I just want to remind you all that, a lot of this might have sounded familiar. And if it's been a while since you engaged with one of our programs, we have a list of our resources, and I think there was a Q&A on this too, that we have to deepen your knowledge of coaching and coaching skills. We have some materials available in our content library. We also have our Leadership Insights newsletters, things like building a culture of feedback or when feedback does not feel like a gift. And there's a ton more Insights newsletters out there. We just released one yesterday about managing conflict. And these newsletters are tagged by topic. And so they're updated every month as well. So they should be useful for you in that way. If you want to read more about any of the highlights that we covered today, we've got our quick guides, we've got our short videos that you can watch, and supervising.umn.edu is the website. We will email all the resources listed in today's webinar to you all, as well as the recording. Again, thanking our speakers for their time and their expertise. And we've looked at what coaching is and isn't, and how it is more than just giving feedback. We heard from our speakers about unique advantages that managers as coaches have, as well as the challenges that they're facing. And we touched on many of those key skills needed for coaching and highlighted those resources. So maybe jot down a couple of key skills that you're working on or you want to start to work on, just so that you have a takeaway. And before we let any of our speakers go, and speakers, any of you can chime in, but anything that you want to summarize or emphasize based on what you heard or some of the comments that were coming through the chat?
One framework I was thinking about with coaching moments, I know a lot of you in the chat mentioned this, and it certainly will relate to the open-ended questions or not. They certainly have a time and place, but not everywhere. I think as you think about members of your team and direct reports, in a few different buckets. Who are the ones that are possibly underperforming and really needed to improve in the space of meeting expectations. I think similarly of who's meeting expectations, but you just want them to grow, thrive, maybe lead with even more agency and take some things off of your task list as their manager. And then similar, but I think separate is who are you preparing for next level roles, whether it's in your organization, and kind of moving up or through, or maybe you run a shop where success means they go on to the next big thing. And so I think having those motivations that you have in their performance space will really, really help clarify what you want to do as a coach in those coaching moments. And certainly I find the gift of open-ended questions is it's kind of a sense of what's in other people's heads, whether you're trying to figure out if they're coachable, are they motivated, or, do they have self-awareness of their strengths, or as well as possibly things that they need to be improving on. And I think that's when open-ended questions can be a real gift. Gives you a sense of what they're already seeing or what they're comfortable talking about, or on where that block is. And then based on whether or not they're performing well or underperforming or possibly holding back, and they offer a lot more than they see, I think that's where you can kind of get some clarity on what to do next. And those open-ended questions will certainly offer a glimmer of that and give you a chance to just sit back and listen, which certainly for me is also a way as a manager to rest and not have it all figured out in that moment. So just wanted to offer that framework and certainly invite Brandon and Jenny to elaborate on any of that or go a different way.
Yeah, I'd echo what Lovey shared too, and I've even used it and I've seen it used too. That SBI model, that situation behavior impact, you can share that feedback with someone and then also be curious around, if something went really well, being able to ask, what did you do differently to prepare? What was that like for you? To really, again, expand upon not only your sense of the feedback, but also what did the other person experience? And again, it's really kind of sitting with that intentionality. You can be guiding the question in a certain sense, but it's also open. It's not just always a direct question. And it's not always knowing what the answer is going to be too. So I think it's really about that both and approach there too. And that coaching too, like many of the leadership development skills, can be on a continuum. You can start with some of the skills that you have and continue to build on those with an end goal for yourself as well. And to also seek the support that you need to invest in the skills that you need to feel confident in the work that you're doing as well, and exploring your own coaching that you might be wanting to get from your leaders or from other resources or mentors as well.
Thank you, Jenny, Lovey, for your thoughts on particularly open-ended questions. Just want to reiterate that in my time as a coach, having just people process out loud and just holding the space for them to do so, 9 times out of 10, they kind of figure it out. They'll figure out their answer. So that's really exciting when you see that light bulb go off. So Brandon, anything that you want to add? I also want to call attention to a question that we have about managing employee expectations surrounding their performance when they feel they are one of the most impactful contributors, but in fact they are not. So just some specific ways to communicate this without creating defensiveness.
I would say that kind of gets back to helping the person really calibrate where is their level of performance today. And some of the things that are really helpful with that, one is there could be misalignment on what the expectations are, right? What does success actually look like? Because sometimes you might, and I've experienced this myself too, you think success looks like this, but it really looks different. And you haven't had that conversation, or you haven't really talked about expectations in enough granularity and detail that the person really understands what's truly expected. So one piece would be having that conversation. Here's what success looks like, and make sure you calibrate there. And then the other piece would be really around the SBI feedback, getting behavioral. So one of the things that's tricky is when you get into sort of like an argument about, how someone is performing, and you as a manager or supervisor, what you can do is really, reel it back a little bit if things are getting, sort of argumentative, and just go back to, okay, what are some of those behaviors that you've observed? What were the outcomes of those behaviors? And then how does that compare to the specific expectations for that role? And so the more you can really get just behavioral and examples and specific, the more effective that's likely to be in terms of really setting those expectations. And the other reality of performance is that, you know, to a certain extent, performance can be relative. And that is that if you have a team and everybody is, you know, let's say you have 5 people all in the same type of role, you know, it may, you know, some may perform better than others, and that's also data. And so sometimes it's really helpful to talk about, okay, when you're talking about what success looks like, you know, looking at what are those top performers doing that's really standing out, and then being concrete and specific about that. So I think that's an important part of that. I would say at the university, I have seen a lot of examples where managers think expectations are clear, but there's a disconnect between what the manager is expecting and what the employee thinks is expected. So a lot of times kind of having that conversation, it can be a tough one, but is really important. So I would say that. And I would echo what my colleague said earlier about the open and closed questions too. I think those were some really good points.
Thank you so much, Brandon. And just wanted to add, I had someone in a supervisory development course that, you know, was having trouble with expectations, or, you know, was pretty clear that they were telling the person how to do X, Y, Z. And so we just kind of came up with a plan to check for understanding, like have the person reiterate exactly what it is that they think they should be doing. And so that seemed to be a good route to go. All right. And just a quick reminder that if you want to continue this conversation or post a new topic, we recommend joining the Supervising at the U Google group if you haven't already. There's the link to do that. We'll also send it out in an email. And again, this session is being recorded, and you'll receive this recording along with all the resources that we mentioned in today's webinar. With that, we will go ahead and thank again our speakers for today. Thank you all for being here today, and we'll see you again. Thank you.